What? My truck's leaking oil from the axle? Well, this is crazy. Patriot Contraptions here, and today we're investigating my Ford F-150's problem with leaking oil from its tire hub or axle. Now, I pulled off the little cap that covers up the axle components, and definitely the smell of burning oil was coming from there. So I went ahead, jacked up the truck, loosened up the lug nuts with my breaker bar, and then jacked up the truck the rest of the way and put some solid supports underneath. Now, it's very important when you're working on a vehicle to have multiple points of contact under it. In this case, I have 4, leaving the jack up. So, now that it's in the air, I take off the rest of the lug nuts and move that tire out of the way. Now that the tire is off, I can go ahead and take off our brake assembly. There are 2 bolts on the back of the assembly. They're kind of a pain to get at, but improvise a little bit and you'll be able to get them off no problem. With the brake out of the way, you can hang it up using a little bungee cord here. This will take the stress off of your brake line. You don't want it just dangling there with the weight on the brake line. Now there's a cotter pin on the front of the axle assembly that needs to come off, and then there's this little bolt with little squares cut out of it. And this goes over the actual bolt and holds it on to keep it from turning. So we take off the bolt, and then behind the bolt there's a little washer, and this washer is actually cut so that it's got 2 smooth sides, and this prevents it from turning and thus loosening up the bolt in front of it. Now with the washer out of the way, we can pull out our first bearing. There are 2 bearings. This is the front bearing of the axle assembly. Now to get off the back axle bearing, we're going to need to remove the actual brake rotor, and you just simply pick it up and pull it off. Now with the brake rotor off, we're going to stick a screwdriver through the front of it and then push it against the rear axle bearing, and just tap it lightly with a hammer. Be careful here, you don't want to scratch up your inside, although that is hard to do. But we'll just tap it, and it should fall out. Now you're going to have 2 parts that fall out of this. Your axle bearing, like, I guess it's a flange seal, and then you're going to have your actual rear bearing to your truck. So I looked at both of these and I wasn't very satisfied with either one. I mean, I probably could have kept the back one, but I decided, hey, I'll just replace all of them while I'm here. So now we need some new parts. So I went over to an auto parts store, and oh yes, it also works as a ring. But I went over to the local auto parts store and I found the parts I needed, and then came back and thoroughly lubricated them with some axle bearing grease. It's important to lubricate them all the way around, and also lubricate the axle itself so that when you slide it on, there's grease in between it and you don't miss anything. So let's start reassembly. First off, we lubricate the back bearing and we put it in. Then we take our new flange seal and we place it on top of the bearing and tap it down lightly with a hammer to seat it firmly in the axle support. Now you'll definitely notice when it's on there because it'll be quite solid and you won't be able to pull it off by hand. This is a good thing because you're going to be sliding this on next and you don't want it falling out of position. So we pick up the brake rotor hub and slide it onto the axle. We're basically reversing the steps of taking it off at this point. So it's on there, nice and good. So now we go ahead, we take our smaller front bearing and we put that on. Now if you need all of these parts, I'll put links to them in the description below. So we slide the front bearing on, and you're going to have the smaller side of it because these are angle bearings on the inside of the rotor. So now it's all the way in there. I'm going to spread some extra grease over it once it's inside, and this extra grease will just make sure it stays lubed for a longer period of time. Then we'll put our little nut, or our little washer on there, and the washer will make sure that the bearing stays in, and then of course over the washer we have our actual nut to secure everything. Now it's very important that you do not over-tighten this nut. You only want about 12 pounds of pressure on the maximum. So this is like a hand cranking job here. It doesn't take much. And I over-tightened it a little bit, and then I had to actually back it off, and then I tightened it again. And it took a little bit to get it on there right, but definitely take the time and make sure it's not too tight. Only 12 pounds of pressure. Then we put our cotter pin through and our lock washer on there, and bingo, it's reassembled. And we put the cap on and bang it on there with a hammer to ensure it doesn't fall off while you're driving. And then put the brake rotor back on, same 2 bolts. You can sometimes push it in the brake itself to make it easier. Then it's time to put your tire on, which is a straightforward task. Simply lift it up, put it on, tighten down the lug nuts by hand, and then tighten them with your wrench Then drop the pickup down halfway so that there's a little weight on the tire, and tighten it with your breaker bar all the way down to its full extent, and then go ahead and drop the truck, and great job. Well done. Have a fantastic day. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, and as always, Patriot Contraptions signing out.